Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back, and we have a special collaboration video for you today. It is still close enough to the new year that we can kind of do a video looking back at the last decade, and very happy to welcome on for the kind of first time as an individual kind of having a conversation, Chazza HD'd. So thank you, Chazza, for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me on again after the quiz, which obviously was very, very good. But yeah, glad to be on.
No, it was very good. I'm glad after the quiz and the chaos that ensued in there that we didn't scare you off from coming back in terms of whose performance. But the special, you might have seen it from the title that might cause you to click on it. But we are going to do our top 10 moments from the last decade. So kind of moments that we think kind of changed the course of the sport or just kind of really stand out in memory for us in particular. So what we're going to do is me and Chaz are both going to go through our top 10 lists, and then we will compare, have a bit of a discussion about it, and then I suppose you guys will leave your thoughts on what you think of ours. But we're going to start off with Chaz's top 10. So Chaz, the floor is yours. What are the top 10 moments of the last decade for you?
Right, well, what I've done is obviously got the top 10, but what I've done is try to pick out, say, the big moments from each year of the decade. I haven't got a big moment from every single year, but I've tried to make sure to remember, every year of the decade and all the moments in it. So what I'm going to do is go from 2010 all the way, of course, up to 2019. So I'm going to start in 2010 and start off with the 2010 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and Ferrari's strategy blunder, because I believe if Ferrari did not make that obviously critical mistake, Fernando Alonso probably wins the World Championship. I think Fernando Alonso's time at Ferrari goes a lot better if he did win the championship of that race, and I don't think the Sebastian Vettel reign of dominance would have actually happened anywhere near as much as it did if Vettel had not won the championship at that Grand Prix. So I think that was a key moment because, again, Alonso's time at Ferrari would have been looked upon a lot differently had they got it right at that particular Grand Prix. And I don't think Vettel at Red Bull would have necessarily had the confidence to then go and win 3 titles after 2010, of course, after that Grand Prix. Then into 2011, this was quite a big change, which of course was DRS and the return of Chaz, which of course we had in 2009. The reason this was such a big thing is because you have to remember, before 2011, the only way you could overtake was doing it properly, getting in the slipstream without any magic buttons or extra engine boost. It was all about proper overtaking. But after 2011, it became a lot easier to overtake, and I think the drivers honestly have kind of adjusted ever since DRS and Chaz and the energy recovery systems were brought into Formula One. I think the drivers ever since have had to drive differently and adjust to those changes, and I think definitely if DRS had not been brought in 2011, I think we would have seen massively different races from 2011 on. So it was quite a big thing at the time, and I think it has been quite a big thing in Formula One. And I hope, honestly, that this time in 10 years' time, that DRS is gone, because I still don't quite think it's a great thing, and I would rather the cars be able to overtake on their own without any, magic rear wing. But then the year after, I think was quite a big year in terms of moments in Formula One. Of course, it was a great season, 2012. Vettel and Alonso battling for the championship, but Lewis Hamilton leaving McLaren for Mercedes, I think, is one of the biggest moments of the decade, because if Lewis Hamilton does not leave McLaren in 2012, then his career would have been completely different. I think Lewis Hamilton would still be on one Drivers' World Championship, because clearly McLaren, even though I think Lewis definitely would have got more out of the car in 2013, 14 and other years since McLaren have won a race, McLaren have not been able to be anywhere near a podium level, never mind a race winning level, since Lewis Hamilton left the team. And I think Hamilton really would have suffered if he stayed at McLaren. So I think, him leaving McLaren, going to Mercedes, it was such a big thing at the time. And when you look back on it now and, how he's dominating with that Team Mercedes now, if he didn't leave McLaren, the driver market and just the world of Formula One and who's won particular championships after that would have been so much different. It would have been so much different from what it is right now. But talking of championships and stuff like that, the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix I also have down because, again, when it comes to Vettel versus Alonso, if Sebastian Vettel had not come through after that, of course, start line or lap one crash and come through to finish in 6th place, and Fernando Alonso had won the championship at that Grand Prix, which honestly at the time watching the race I thought he was going to do, again, things could have been quite a lot different for Fernando Alonso in his career and how his time at Ferrari was viewed, because when Fernando Alonso went to Ferrari, of course the aim was Fernando to win a championship at Ferrari like Michael Schumacher did or Kimi Raikkonen did, so on and so forth, and that was Fernando's last chance to win a championship. And because really of Vettel's great drive back through the field, Fernando's time at Ferrari really was, I guess, it peaked around that time. It was kind of defined by that. So again, that was another, I think, big moment definitely for Fernando Alonso and as well for Sebastian Vettel. Great drive to come back and win his 3rd title. But then after 2013, of course, Vettel won his 4th championship. We had a massive new set of regulations and a new era in Formula One, the V6 hybrid era. Honestly, at the time, I had no idea what was going to happen post 2014, no idea what was going to happen. I don't think anyone actually knew what to expect, not just in terms of who was going to be winning races, what teams were going to be good and not so good, just the way the cars looked on track, how they would have to be driven, looked after when it came to fuel saving and stuff like that. It was a completely new era of Formula One, kind of similar to 2009, and really since 2014 in terms of winning championships, winning races and dominating, Formula One has never been the same since, as of course Mercedes have completely dominated Formula One since 2014. And I think definitely 2014 and that new set of regulations, it really did make and break certain teams. For example, Caterham, it kind of broke them. Of course, the extra expenses of having to get the power unit from Renault. For certain other teams, it meant that they went down the grid, such as Sauber. Williams, of course, went up the grid because of their power unit being the Mercedes power unit. It really did have a big effect on the teams and just the way Formula One was. And I don't think we can stress enough how, after 2014, Formula One has been massively different to what it was at the end of the V8 era. But sadly, even though I tried to make this as, in terms of the moments, as I tried to make it, say, the best moments or good moments, but we do have to also remember the sad accident of Jules Bianchi. That was obviously a crushing blow to Formula One because Jules was going to be absolutely 100% a Ferrari driver and was going to be a top driver, in my opinion, because if you look at 2014, there were certain races, certain performances where he was incredible in what was an awful car. Of course, the points finish in Monaco. I remember he out-qualified Kimi Raikkonen in Hungary, I think 2014. Amazing performance, and I think without a doubt we lost a star, potentially a superstar at best, in Jules Bianchi. And when we look at moments of the decade, whether we like it or not, we've got to remember Jules Bianchi because, again, we lost a very, very good driver in him. But then we fast forward a couple years. I'm going to skip over, of course, 2015 because that was a horrible year when it came to racing, and go to 2016. Now, there's a couple moments from 2016 that I really think, were big in terms of setting up the future of Formula One going into 2018, 19, and even now 2020. Lewis Hamilton, of course, having his engine failure in Malaysia in 2016 was a massive moment because it was the moment that secured Nico Rosberg's first and only, of course, World Championship, even though Rosberg did, of course, have to win the race after in Suzuka and get the points needed in the final 4 races. That was the big momentum shift that, completely killed Lewis's chance of being world champion that season. But also another big thing that happened that year was Max Verstappen's first victory, of course, youngest ever winner. I think he was 18 years old. That was a massive moment, I think, for Max Verstappen, especially at Red Bull, because to come into your first race, I know of course the two Mercedes took each other out and that was a big helping hand, but to come into your first race at Red Bull and win the Grand Prix at 18, I think, honestly, that set Max Verstappen up so well for now, what he is now, and that is, of course, the team leader of Red Bull. It's a great way to start for him, and I think it was a great statement from Max Verstappen of how good of a driver he was at the time and how great he can go on to be. But then the final 2 moments I've got is, first off, Baku 2017. Not only for the crazy race we had, but at the end of the 2010s decade, the title fights were between Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, of course, in the Mercedes and Ferrari, respectively. And I think Baku 2017 was the critical point mentally in that battle, mentally between Hamilton and Vettel, because what Vettel did in, deliberately hitting Hamilton, I think Vettel basically surrendered the mental, momentum that he had at that point of the season to Lewis Hamilton, and I don't think Sebastian Vettel, honestly, has recovered against Lewis Hamilton ever since that Grand Prix. And I think, honestly, you can, if you go from even the end of 2018 back to that moment, you can trace what happened in 2018 all the way back to that moment, because again, that race, Sebastian Vettel, all he had to do was not do what he did, and he would have won the Grand Prix, of course, of Hamilton's headrest issue. But of course, he did what he did, and I think surrendered mentally to Lewis Hamilton, and it cost him for the rest of that season and 2018. And the final moment I've got is Hamilton winning his 5th world title. The reason I've got that is because I think that was the first time that, without a doubt, he was undisputedly an all-time great of Formula One without any debate whatsoever. And of course, equaling Juan Manuel Fangio for championships is a massive moment for any driver. So, yeah, I think Lewis Hamilton, that was, especially after that season where he had to overcome a very quick Ferrari car and a driver in Sebastian Vettel, who was still quick in that season despite his errors at times. I think that season was the season where Lewis Hamilton clearly established himself as, without a doubt, an all-time great. And that is, for me, my top 10 moments of the decade. So, Mike, let's hear yours. I'm hoping they're not exactly the same as mine.
There are differences, it's good, but there were some great top 10 moments in there, and I was thinking when I was listening, I was like, yeah, that moment, of course. But I think this is going to be, people will listen and they'll have their own ones, like, how did you miss that from there? So I'm going to try and go in chronological order. Mine wasn't trying to dictate. I liked how you tried to kind of almost give one per year of the decade, but I'm some of them are kind of personal to me in terms of moments, and some I feel like had great lasting impacts on the sport. And my first one is it probably would be a surprise in terms of making a top 10 moment, but it's Button winning Canada 2011. And for me, why this makes the top 10 moments, despite obviously the Formula One official record, for me this was the race of the decade. And I remember myself being a fan of Formula One and not really having many fans of Formula One around me, but people who weren't fans spoke about Formula One because of this race. And I think when a race has the power to do that, like Buttons did, because it was just so mental and it was almost movie-esque of you can't write it, on the last lap that Vettel spins out and Button manages to claim victory. It kind of created a buzz around F1, which, helped it. We were going through a real positive spur and through a pretty, if we're being honest, not great season. It was a good season, But I suppose compared to the 2010 and 2012 season it's sandwiched in, it probably isn't looked as favourable. But that was a big moment for me. My second one is Michael Schumacher's last pole lap at Monaco. I think it becomes a top 10 moment for me because of what happened afterwards. Obviously, the return of Michael Schumacher, he said he came back to win championships, but realistically he was probably of an age and had left the sport too long that was almost virtually an impossible task, even for a driver as talented as him. But Monaco, for me, the circuits of Monaco and Singapore are on the race calendar because it proves why qualifying and the technical ability of the drivers is still a thing. And to get your last ever pole lap at Monaco in the fashion that he did, and then obviously with his skiing accent afterwards, and we all hope that he's keep fighting and everything's as okay as it can be with his family there. It just was, I think, a pretty special moment and a pretty special last pole lap. The third one is going to be Romain Grosjean's crash and race ban after Spa 2012. And I think this makes a moment because for the wrong reasons, it's defined a driver more than any other season. Because although he went on to have a fairly good 2013 season and some good races post that, I don't think he's ever been able to shake this. And it's the only race ban, I believe, that was given throughout the whole decade. You can confirm that for me, Chaz. I haven't just made that up from memory. It was the only race ban of the decade, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think Grosjean was the only one banned.
So, which, is a pretty big deal in terms of to receive a race ban from there. So, that was that defining moment. Let me see. So, my next one was very similar to you. Both my 2014 ones were similar to you. Actually, sorry, I've got a 2012 one as well. Seb winning his third title in Brazil. Obviously, you had this one as well. For me, it was, again, that it was defining for Alonso in terms of, I think this is the race that broke him at Ferrari. I think this is the race where he was like, I don't think it's going to happen. For me at Ferrari, it never was the same. The kind of reputation deteriorated, and like you said, I think if he'd won it, his time at Ferrari would have been looked at differently, and it really kind of cemented Vettel as, he wasn't just this kid who was driving a really good car and winning championships because of that. He well and truly earned that, to be facing the opposite way on the grid and to come back and drive up to 6th, I believe, finished at the end. It was an incredible race, one of the best races of the decade. And so that is my fourth one. My fifth and sixth come from 2014 and the introduction of the hybrid engine. Like you, I don't think anyone could have predicted what was going to happen, that Mercedes would then win every single Constructors' Championship from that point onwards and would win every driver's title, and Lewis Hamilton would win 5 of those titles in the rest of the decade. I mean, even saying that now, like, this probably is the moment of the decade. We'll probably talk about that after I've gone through, but just crazy how it has influenced the dominance that Mercedes have done by absolutely capitalising on that hybrid engine. Then, like you, most of these have been positive moments, but I think Jules Bianchi's crash, just for the safety element of it, obviously we lost the talent that is Jules Bianchi, and it's always hard, and it was the first time people of our generation, Chazza, who'd witnessed and lost a F1 driver in their lifetime, because, well, I was 1 year old when Senna died, so obviously I have no recollection of the moment. So I think, and the safety that it implemented, I think it was very influential in the halo coming in to the design of the car, and obviously the recovery vehicles now aren't allowed to enter onto track because of it. So it's had safety implementations that have hopefully made things better for the sport. We then move on to my next one, and that is Alonso's GP2 comments. And this makes it because I think a lot of people, when they saw McLaren Honda getting back together, it was a very romantic and nostalgic reunion. Obviously, they'd been together in the late 80s where you had Senna and Prost, the MP44, just, an absolutely incredible car and, incredible dominance that they had during that period. And you were just a bit like, wow, this is bold, but can McLaren get it back with Honda? Can they return to those days? And I think that comments brought everyone to the reality that the dream of that partnership with Honda and McLaren, for whatever reason, just wasn't going to work out how everyone thought it might do. And I think it was kind of the idea with Alonso that you were going, realistically, he may never win another world championship now, because McLaren was his last big bet and roll of the dice that he went for, and it didn't pan out how he wanted it to. My next moment is the Rosberg winning the title. For me, this was huge, and within 5 days retiring, because at that stage it looked like no one could beat Lewis. Rosberg he'd shown glimpses, but I think everyone thought that Lewis had his card. And I know you released a video a couple of days back of analysing that season a bit between Hamilton and Rosberg, and there were obviously elements of fortune to it, but there were ifs, buts and maybes to every season. But I think it was the shock that he'd actually done it. And then the fact that it was like 5 days later, he's like, I'm immediately retiring from the sport. Everyone was just like, whoa, what's happened? This has just accumulated into like a great rivalry, and now we've just walked away from it. It was just a bit of a WTF moment from the decade. I was just like, has he just done that? It's crazy, and it kind of, it's... Although Bottas 3.0 may be born next year, it meant that his teammate has never really got close, and he's never really had that same inner team pressure as what Rosberg gave in that 2016 season. So I have 2 remaining left. One is recent, and I know obviously this one affected you a lot, and it was obviously Anton Hubert's death, obviously not directly affecting in F1, and I just think this even more so, it seemed to really shake the community, and I think it really brought people together, and I think it gave people a realisation of this sport can never truly be safe, and the admiration of what these drivers do for essentially our entertainment. And I know it's things that they love, but I'm sure the implications of it will bring safety like Jules's. But it was a moment that I think really shook all of us in the core. I know we both kind of postponed videos at the time because it didn't kind of feel right in terms of it, and it was courageous for those guys in F3 and F1 to race the next day in light what happened. And some things kind of seemed destined to happen, and that Spa win for Leclerc just it seemed weird how it happened like that, but a nice fitting tribute for it at the end. But on a more positive one to end my top 10 moments is you went for Lewis winning his 5th world title to put him amongst the all-time greats. I went for him winning the 6th world title. Arguably, I could say I think the 5th world title was better because it was the way that he beat Sebastian. But I just think 6th, he is now 2nd on the all-time list. He's one grasp away from Michael Schumacher, and it's just incredible. Absolutely, 5 titles. He's won half the titles in a decade. Only Schumacher has matched that. And yeah, just an absolute incredible feat. But yeah, those are my top 10 moments. So now we kind of get on to the bit where we compare. So I suppose I'll throw it over to you. Any questions on my top 10?
I think the Grosjean one you had was a good one, because not only, and it is sad, it has defined him, which is sad, because I think if you look at his, I think it's actually a better thing to look at his progression after that. I mean, I know in the last couple of years he has really gone downhill, but I think his progression after Spa 2012, you know, at the end of 2013, he improved a lot. And then I remember in 2015, I thought, honestly, he was driving unbelievably good in what was not that good of a car and a team that we know was basically dead before Renault came along and saved the team. But as well, I think that incident, it brought along a system that we talk about actually quite a lot now, and that is the point system. Whenever you have an incident, you get points added to your license.
Correct,
that
yeah.
Incident brought that system into Formula One, so it was quite a big moment, I guess, for driving etiquette in Formula One.
Yeah, no, I thought it was in. Obviously, no other driver has got it in F1 other than obviously Raghunathan, who managed to do it twice in F2 last year, which is quite the achievement in itself. For me, on your one, just that big moment, Lewis Hamilton moving to Mercedes. Like, it's incredible. We can only go ifs, buts and maybes, but what would have happened in an alternate reality if Lewis Hamilton hadn't have taken that gamble and gone with Niki Lauda to Mercedes? Just like, yeah, like, wow, what a big moment that was.
It is massive, because I mean, I think the biggest thing to look at is if he had stayed at McLaren, is who would have gone to Mercedes instead, because he seemed at the time to be the only big driver who was talking to Mercedes to go to them. I think the other drivers who were linked were Hulkenberg, De Resta, Perez, drivers who are good, but they're not exactly, you know, Alonso, Hamilton, Vettel caliber of drivers. So
no,
I guess going into the V6 era, it probably just would have been Rosberg as the, you know, number one of the team, which he was, let's be honest, in 2010, 11, 12, mainly because Michael Schumacher, of course, wasn't at his, you know, usual level that he was before in his first career. But yeah, I think Hamilton would have got more out of the McLaren car, definitely in 2013 and 14, and McLaren probably wouldn't have looked as bad as they did. But yeah, Hamilton, I think Hamilton probably, his chances of going to Ferrari, I think, would be much higher if he did stay at McLaren, because he probably would have had to have made a decision, say in 2015, 16, whether to go to a Ferrari or maybe even go to a Red Bull, who knows. But yeah, that decision, him, you know, leaving McLaren, I remember at the time it was massive news, and everyone thought he was mental for leaving McLaren, because, I mean, you'll remember, pre-2012, McLaren were always in a position to win races and get podiums. I don't think there was really ever a season McLaren couldn't win a race. Maybe if you go back to, say, 94 or 95, so like, 15, 16 years previous. So at the time, it was viewed upon as a really big step, and of course, it was a great one. But talking of Schumacher a minute ago, I just want to touch on your one about Schumacher's pole lap, and I think that moment doesn't get talked about enough, to be honest, because the lap itself, if you watch it on board, it's such a great lap. And my favourite part of it is when he's going through the swimming pool one-handed, because his other hand is on the brake bias and he's moving, I think, towards the front or the rear. It's an incredible lap. And I feel kind of sorry for Michael, because if you look at 2012, he was actually really good in 2012 in qualifying. He had a lot of third, fourth, fifth places, but he would have, gearbox issue, or, he'd even, crash into a certain driver, or he'd have a grid penalty like he had for Monaco. I really feel sorry for Michael for that season, because, again, if you look at his qualifying, he was really good in qualifying, really good, but that season ran out of all luck that I guess he had in his first career.
Yeah, I mean, you said gearbox issues. He actually got pole, but didn't start on pole in that race, did he? No. I believe Mark Webber got promoted, and that was the Monaco that Webber won. And I agree with you. You feel sorry for him, and if we're honest, if you show pace in qualifying, like I said before, in those technical circuits, especially at Monaco and Singapore, it shows the technical ability of the driver. And, that's to get as fast a lap as you possibly can out of your machinery. That is, just an amazing technical gift to have. And, go back further, Senna and stuff was one of the best, and why someone like Lewis Hamilton has always kind of wanted to emulate someone like that. From there, I think another one of your points that was really key in terms of two people whose careers have almost been defined a little bit from the 2010 and 2012 seasons of Alonso narrowly missing out. And I think those seasons show perfectly how F1 is a sport of fine margins. Like, there's so many ifs, buts and maybes. You can go through like the kind of decades of like little moments of if he had just kind of won that race, or if that crash hadn't happened, or he might have won a title, and you go, who knows what might have happened from there. But it's so funny how it defined that. I don't think when Alonso won his second title in 2006, if you said at that time to anyone, and when Fernando Alonso won't win another, I mean, it's unlikely that he'll come back and win another title. So I think we can pretty much 99.9% say that this is true. But to go, he would never win another title, I think people would laugh at you at that time. And, with Seb, I think if they said, especially to a young German driver who'd, he'd shown promise, but he hadn't led a single round up until that race, especially the 2010 one, was crazy, the composure that he had to get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely was. But with Alonso, I think you make a great point, because if you look at 2006, of course, he won his second world title, but I think it was the end of 2005. It was announced he was going to McLaren, and I think everyone at that time was thinking that Alonso was probably going to kind of run McLaren, kind of like a Senna-like kind of number one driver in the team. Of course, Lewis Hamilton was always going to be there, fighting away and keeping Alonso on his toes. But I think everyone at the time, because they didn't know what Lewis Hamilton was going to be, I think thought that first off at McLaren he would probably win, at the very, very least one. And then I think he was always going to drive for Ferrari, to be honest. I think, honestly, if he didn't announce he was going to McLaren at the end of 2005, I think Alonso probably would have gone to Ferrari instead of Raikkonen, and Kimi probably would have stayed at McLaren with Hamilton. So I think Fernando was always going to drive for Ferrari, because there's always been, I think, a connection there. But yeah, after 2006, it's incredible that he didn't win, another championship when he's had, 3 big chances, and he had kind of a half chance in 2013. It's incredible that he never, got another one in. And I will say, for not only for Vettel, if you, told him he would, win championships, I think if you told Red Bull, 10 years ago, going into 2010, they were going to win 4 drivers and 4 constructors titles in a row, they would have laughed at you incredibly hard. I mean, I know 2009 they were competitive, but they were 10 years ago only in Formula One for what, 4 years? So
yeah.
basically like a Haas, kind of like the Haas team in terms of how old they were in Formula One.
Well, I think their first full year was 2005, wasn't it? So I think they'd had 5 years, but it was 4 years, and then they had the 2009 season.
Yeah, but I think, again, if you told Red Bull that they were going to win 4 drivers and constructors in a row, I don't think anyone would have believed that. I mean, I know there were people thinking, oh, Red Bull, you know, they got a good car, but I don't think anyone honestly believed Red Bull would ever win a championship. I think people still thought it was going to be a Ferrari and McLaren, you know, monopoly like it was at the end of the 2000s. But I think if you look at, you know, I think Red Bull, honestly, them winning the championships, I think that was in the, you know, start of the decade. I think that really was a big shock to, you know, some of the older, more historically great teams like your Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, and I don't think those certain teams have really, I guess, recovered.
Well, yeah, I think if you went into the day, you could probably believe Williams, but start of 2010, if you went right for the next 10 years, there are going to be 2 winning constructors and 2 teams who've won a driver championship. They're going to be Red Bull, Mercedes. You just can't fathom that. Like, literally, no. And the way that they didn't even intertwine it. They literally went 1-1-4, then the other 1-6. Like, for their periods, and it just shows through times if you. And I think it's where they're kind of hoping in 2021 that there isn't loopholes within these rules that someone can absolutely dominate if they get a head start. Because, yeah, just both of those teams got a head start on, you know, those rule changes, and it just allowed them to go forward and never look back, really.
Yeah, I think in conclusion, when we you know talk about this decade, I think that's probably the kind of the worst thing about the decade is the sheer dominance in the championships. And I think really the 2010s decade is probably, in terms of entertainment wise, even though there has been great seasons and moments as we've just gone over, I think it has probably been the least entertaining and probably the most dominant and one-sided, I guess you could say, in Formula One history. I mean, even in the 2000s, you had Ferrari, I think Renault, McLaren once, and then Brawn at the end of it. Even though Ferrari won a lot in the 2000s, it felt a lot more mixed up. It felt like there was a lot more unpredictability, and I guess that, you know, it wasn't just going to be the same teams every single season. I think, again, in conclusion, that'd be the one thing to take away from this decade that hopefully doesn't happen in the 2020s, that we don't just have the same 3 or 4 teams that, say, every 2 or 3 seasons we get a new team going in there, then one team drops and then, I don't know, comes back and then other teams drop. Because that's kind of how it was in the 2000s. You wouldn't just have the same 3 teams, maybe for 2 or 3 seasons at most, but it wouldn't just be the same teams like we've had basically, since 2014, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and I think in combination with that, it isn't necessarily the dominance. I think people can accept dominance, although obviously I remember at the time Ferrari was still kind of viewed as boring, although a Ferrari dominance era in the Mercedes with the title battles that we had would probably be looked on more favourably now. I think because you go early 2000s, it was Schumacher, Hakkinen, then 03 it was Raikkonen, Schumacher, then 05 it was Alonso, Raikkonen, 06 Schumacher, Alonso, 07 Alonso, Hamilton, Raikkonen, Massa, Hamilton, Rubens, Barrichello, Jenson, Button in 09. It was just, there were always title battles, and going into the last few races there was a chance of someone winning it, and there just hasn't been enough, other than the start of the decade, but you could only really say 2010 and 2012. There hasn't really been any real mammoth grip your teeth in. Like, I listed pretty much, I think 8-9 out of the seasons in the 2000s had a very good title battle going forward. Could you say 2, possibly 3 in the last decade?
I think, 2016, of course, it went down to the final race, but I think it was an anticlimactic, ending that season, because I think after Malaysia and Suzuka, where Rosberg, I think, took or outscored Hamilton by about 25 points over those 2 races, we kind of knew what was going to happen, because Rosberg, clearly showed his intention to just finish in second place and get enough points to win it. I think, as you say, if you look at the 2000s, there was always, except really for 01, 02, 04, there was a final 3 or 4 race, battle for the championship, and sometimes even, as you said, a 3-way fight, like 03, Schumacher, Montoya, Raikkonen, and then Raikkonen, Alonso, Hamilton. 7. I think for the 2020s, I think in 2020 we can have Lewis and Max. I think that's the big hope for me, because I think those two, when they go head to head, honestly, I don't think people are prepared for just how great these two can be when they go head to head like they do. I'm just hoping for 2020, of course, we get that Lewis-Max battle, but I'm hoping in 2021 we get a situation where, of course we are going to have your top 2 or 3 teams and then a bit of a midfield, but I'm hoping we get back to that end of season, as you say, just mammoth title battles between 2 drivers, or even maybe 3 drivers, or maybe even like 2010, 4 drivers. I don't think that'll happen for a long time though, but I'm hoping that's what 2021 brings back, is not only end of season title fights, but between different teams, because I think it's a lot more exciting if it's between different teams, because of course different cars, different strengths, different weaknesses, you don't know what's going to happen. And I just think that really, even if the racing wasn't great, it would kind of paper over the cracks if we had a bit more going on at the end of the season for the championship, and it would be more exciting. And I think, honestly, we need it, because there's been too many, times we've got to Brazil and Abu Dhabi in the last 10 years, and we kind of not want to watch the race, but, the season, we know the season's over, and we just kind of are waiting for 2020 or the next year, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it compounds, like, I know I was speaking about Abu Dhabi, it compounds like an event like Abu Dhabi, absolutely stunning spectacle. Everyone I've spoken to who's been to the Grand Prix loves the experience of going, and they've got so many track layouts they can do there to improve the racing. It can improve it, but it's also suffered a lot that the fact it hasn't had many title fights going there, so therefore it's always going to be a bit of an anticlimax, because it's a bit of a, well, we kind of want next season to start now to see if it's different type of thing. But I think the positive looking into next season is we potentially have, we have Max and Leclerc at Red Bull and Ferrari respectively, Norris at McLaren if they can sort it out, and then potentially George Russell at Mercedes. And in those 4 young drivers, it could be, from the glimpses they've shown, an enthralling decade just on the talent that we've got all culminating in the sport at once. But it's all ifs, buts and maybes, but you can only hope that some of it pans out at least. Even if 2 of them fulfill their potential, then we could have some fantastic seasons in store. But I think that's probably a good point to round off. I think good top 10 moments between the both of us, and some nice comparing at the end of there. I enjoyed having you on, Chaz. I hope you've enjoyed coming on and discussing your moments.
Yeah, I have. Thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it was a great chat, and hopefully you guys listening at home have enjoyed it as well, and get involved in the comments below on your top 10 moments from the decades, and if they differ to ours, or if you have different reasonings for ones that we've selected, please get involved in there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And if you have somehow come across my channel before Chaz's channel, I would be surprised. But please do go and check out Chaz's channel. Does kind of absolutely great F1 topics. You know, always has like a good discussion videos on there as well over the race weekend. Does some fantastic live streams. You do every session of the weekend, don't you, on your live streams?
Not every session, but you know, every key session. So the main important practice 2, and then obviously qualifying the race and all the build up and reaction. So yeah, we do a lot, and I honestly cannot wait for 2020 now.
I'm very excited. This has been a good chat, but it's also meant that the wait to the new season is a little bit longer. But hopefully you can get yourself along to testing, so that'll ease your bug a bit as well from there. And we'll have to try and watch the Formula E next weekend to get our racing fix, I imagine. But but yes, Chaz, it's been great having you on. Guys, if you are new around here, and if you like the content we do, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can watch more videos just like this. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.